We want to pause and reflect, and we want to share with you once again what made these two so special, not just to us, but to all of our hometowns that WDBJ7 serves. Please join us now in a moment of silence.
Colleagues of the two journalists gunned down on live television remember reporter Allison Parker and cameraman Adam Ward, and we're back now with the panel. George, we had a perfect storm this week with a gunman, Vester Flanagan, shooting the reporter and cameraman on live television and then putting out his own video of the murder on Facebook and Twitter. What are your thoughts about the way this was carried out?
Well, when these horrific events occur, there's an irresistible itch to commit sociology, to find some explanation, causal link in some social prompting. This gentleman, this man, was a gay African-American who nevertheless was hired in spite of what he took to be insuperable handicaps. And he does seem to have bought into the grievance culture of our time, feeling prickly and set upon at all times by all people. That said, it seems to me we all should step back before explaining these in terms of some defect in the society or some new social media culture, because what that commits us to is the belief that every evil in the world can be changed by fiddling with the society, by rearranging it, by some law or regulation or something else. There are times when you just have to throw up your hands and say there's evil in the world, always has been, always will be.
Well, if there's one person who is going to try to find solutions, it's Andy Parker, who is the father of that young woman reporter, Allison Parker, and he said now that he is going to fight for tougher gun control. Here he is.
If we can affect meaningful changes in our gun laws here, you know, this senseless act, this senseless murder will not go in vain.
Christi, after the shooting, President Obama also deplored gun violence, but there was no talk in the White House at all about trying to push Congress for new laws. Have they basically given up on that fight?
I think they've given up on making it a marquee effort. As you recall, a couple of years ago, the president put his all, expended some political capital. Democrats gave a really hard push toward coming up with some kind of...
This was after Newtown.
This was after the Newtown shootings. And as we all know, it failed. And the White House learned that lesson. So while you did hear the president this week express concern about gun violence, and his staff was also saying there are still laws that would make other kinds of gun violence less likely, none of those laws seem perhaps like no law would have perhaps steered away from this particular event. But at the end of the week, the White House press secretary said, when the American people rise up and demand this kind of change, it will happen, which was an indication that it's just not a thing on the White House agenda this fall.
We asked you for questions for the panel, and we got several like these. Tamara Highland asked on Facebook, what change in the current law would have prevented this recent incident from happening? And Happy Camper tweeted this: how can background checks be more effective? Suspected unstable people with clean records are getting through. Sheryl, I know you talked this week to Andy Parker, the father of Allison Parker, as well as Governor McAuliffe, the governor of Virginia. I mean, that's one of the things that's so troubling here. Vester Flanagan went to a federally registered gun store, bought the gun, went through a background check, passed the background check. So what could have prevented this?
Well, you're absolutely correct, and it's not clear, frankly, as George said, that anything could have prevented this, but gun control advocates and people like Andy Parker would say that some things can be done. First of all, 33,000 Americans die every year of gunshot wounds. That's accidents, suicides, and also homicides. A Harvard researcher has estimated that our firearm homicide rate in the U.S. is 7 times that of Canada. So people like Andy Parker and Governor McAuliffe are saying, even if there are some small things that we could do to reduce that number, we should do them. So number one, universal background checks. There are still guns sold in this country, private sales, where there are no background checks conducted.
Gun shows, things like that.
Gun shows, etc.
Now, that is not, we should point out, what happened in the case of Vester Flanagan.
Vester Flanagan bought his gun legally, passed a background check. It is true. Here's something else that advocates are talking about. In California, California, there is a new law called a gun violence restraining order. It's kind of like a domestic violence restraining order where families of people who are mentally unstable or who fear that their loved ones may come into possession of guns and do harm with them can go to a court and request a restraining order for 21 days. It can be extended up to a year. And advocates are starting to talk about why not put something like this into place, so at least if family members recognize or loved ones recognize that that people they know are unstable, they can try to do something to prevent it. This grew out of a case in Isla Vista, California, where a young man shot young women on the campus of University of California at Santa Barbara. Also, people are talking about smart guns. We have smartphones that can be tracked. Why not smart guns that can be tracked the same way if your iPhone is lost? So there are steps that could be taken, might not have prevented this particular instance, but advocates say they would reduce gun violence.
Michael, from a conservative perspective, what can be done?
Well, and the sad thing is that there probably wasn't any legislative solution that could have prevented this tragedy. And it's a natural human impulse when a tragedy happens to look for an explanation. And in a society that is increasingly uncomfortable with the concept of evil, we don't have something that we can look at. And so there wasn't a legislative solution that could have solved this. There are some things, as George acknowledged, as George said, that are just evil, that don't have any other explanation. And the only thing you can do in those situations is you can come together as a society, you can support each other, you can help each other try to heal. I think the most inspiring thing we've seen this summer was the way Charleston and the entire state of South Carolina came together and supported each other, healed, and ultimately forgave. And that's ultimately all that you can do in the face of evil.
I want to, in the time we have left, almost make this a more philosophical and less a political conversation. Christi, I probably made a mistake because I watched Vesterly Flanagan's video. And if you watch it, and I suggest you don't watch it, you see that he has his gun out and he's ready to shoot, but he notices that the cameraman is panning away and looking at the lake that Allison Parker and the Chamber of Commerce women were talking about. And it was only when they panned back and were on them that he shot at them. Clearly, he wanted this to happen on live TV. He wanted people to be able to see it. Then he wanted to post the video that he had so carefully done on social media. And I guess the question is, why? What?
Well, that's a really important question, and one of the debates that arose just in the hours after this on the internet was whether you should watch the video. If that, in fact, is the kind of notoriety that killers crave, does watching it and sharing it drive the incidents of violence? There was also a counter-argument that if we're going to respond by trying to make public policy that addresses tragedies like this, shouldn't we know intimately what we're talking about? And there's an argument to be made that by watching and bearing witness, we can be more responsible participants in that conversation.
And I noticed that very quickly, not immediately, but very quickly, Twitter and Facebook took the videos down.
Right, and I don't know exactly how that happened, if that was something they did by instinct or by request. I'm not sure, but it certainly had an effect.
Thank you, panel. See you next Sunday.